Okay. I think it's on, and we can now officially start. So, hello everyone. Once again, thank you very much for joining. My name is Justyna Deszcz-Kupczak, and I am Associate Professor of Literature at the Institute of English Studies at the University of Wrocław. I'm also a member of the Center for Young People's Literature and Culture at the University of Wrocław, and the center, another center for research on children's and young adult literature at the Faculty of Letters at the University of Wrocław. And before I introduce Samina, let me explain that this talk is hosted by the Institute of English Studies, but it is also hosted, or it's happening under the aegis of the International Erasmus Mundus Master, Children's Literature, Media and Culture, which is an international MA program coordinated by the University of Glasgow in collaboration with several other universities, mostly European universities. You have the link to the program in the chat. And this program is now finishing. We are in the final year, but there's another program ahead of us, an extension of the current one. And you are also, of course, welcome to look it up, and maybe you will find it of interest. Maybe your students will be interested to joining us. Please share the information with them. And also let me welcome the PhD students from the Faculty of Letters at the University of Wrocław. This lecture is also a part of what we call Master Lectures offer at our faculty. So thank you very much for deciding to join us today. And I'm delighted, finally, to introduce Samina Mishra, who is a documentary filmmaker, writer, and teacher working in New Delhi, and who is interested in media for and about children, as well as in the experience of growing up in India. And her work has been published and screened in India and abroad. She's the founder of the Magic Key Center for the Arts and Childhood that works directly with children and adults, and the focus is using arts in education. Samina is also currently working on the Hum Hindustani Poetry Podcast, which is a series podcast based on poems written by children on the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And today, Samina is going to share her experience, her vast experience with us in her talk. Dragons represent me. I think me to some extent as well. I do identify with this. I like this idea very much. So dragons represent me, being and becoming with the arts. So Samina, please, Teams is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justyna, for the introduction and for organizing this talk, this opportunity to share my work with a much wider audience. I hope together we'll be able to kind of traverse some ideas that get thrown up by creating art with and for children. And perhaps, that this will kind of show us the way forward at a time in the world where we are facing so much conflict and strife. So I'm just going to share my slideshow, and then we can begin. Is that good?
Yes, I can confirm that we can see it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, screen. Yeah, very good.
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to begin with a poem that was found on the internet. It's credited to a 5th grader in Hawaii. And I begin with it because I think it's an example of a child's desire to be recognized and to be heard. And with thanks to Paramita Vora for having shared this with me some months ago. So this is the poem. No one knows my heart is a fluttering bird I carry through my life towards the future. No one knows the words I softly whisper, but I do. I do. I will wake today and know my purpose. I will walk today and feel my worth. I will be happy in the world. Dragons represent me, represent me, represent me. This act of expression by the 5th grader Mayana, I think it draws deep into the child's inner self, where the natural world and the world of the imagination, the fluttering bird and the mythic dragon, come together in seamless beauty to convey the child's sense of self. The poem tells us, I will wake today and know my purpose. I will walk today and feel my worth. That voice of the child contains the ideas of both being and becoming. And then she says, dragons represent me, represent me, represent me. The rhythm of that repetition, it conveys her fervent desire. She's almost making sure that she doesn't forget that. And the dragons, I think they not only remind us how easily children's worlds can move between reality and fantasy, but that the process of becoming requires the ability to imagine. The image on the poster and on these slides are connected to this last line of the dragons. And in some ways, I feel that the poem it brings together both the child and art, and as well as the idea of identity formation, which is really the focus of this talk. So these drawings that I chose for the poster and in these slides, they actually are from children in a completely different part of the world, from Mayana in Hawaii. They are from a collection of children's artwork in response to Shantan's The Lost Thing. These drawings were made by children between the ages of 9 and 14 in New Delhi. They are mostly Afghan refugee children. Um, I run a workshop with a group of these children, and these were made after we watched the animated version of The Lost Thing, and we talked about belonging and unbelonging, of feeling different, of not fitting in. And the hybrid creatures that I think the children have drawn, they are a kind of amalgam of elements from their world as well as from their imagination. In the writing exercise that followed this, I asked the children to think of a verb and to connect that verb to a feeling, that something that they do and how that makes them feel. So one child wrote what is on the screen: I dance to feel hopeful. I run to feel strong. I dream to feel powerful. This, I think, is the possibility of art: to dwell in the space of emotion and to learn from that who you are, who you want to be, your place in the world, and the place you seek. In this particular workshop, art, both a work of art created for children and then artwork created by children as a response, that allowed us to tap into the inner world and link that to identity formation. By beginning with the feeling of not fitting in, we were able to understand an act of othering and what the coming together of several lost things can mean and also feel. No one knows the words I softly whisper, writes the child poet. But she does. She knows. And perhaps I think becoming starts with a soft whisper to the self, which I think that the arts can enable. I'm a filmmaker, a children's book writer, and a teacher. And much of my work centers around the child's voice, a sort of attempt to make place for it, an attempt to understand it. That voice of the child, we know, is not homogeneous. We know that from scholarship that has questioned the normative idea of childhood. We know that different groups of children experience the world in different ways, some gently, others in a harsher way. Recognizing this gives us an opening into conversations with both children and adults about the world and about the place of power in the world. Children's culture is a window into how human society is constructed, how it is construed, and how we can change it. So for this talk, I thought I'd share some examples from my recent work created for and with children, and from that share ideas thrown up in relation to the world and human society. Now, media created for children has the curious aspect of being made by adults. Now, I'm not going to go into the debates about the impossibility of children's literature, which are well known. I'd just like to quote from Neil Gaiman, something that I think conveys my position on it. This is Neil Gaiman from The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I'm going to tell you something important. Grown-ups don't look like grown-ups on the inside either. Outside, they're big and thoughtless, and they always know what they're doing. Inside, they look just like they always have, like they did when they were your age. Truth is, there aren't any grown-ups, not one in the whole wide world. As psychology has repeatedly told us, we carry the child in us. So we need to acknowledge that the borders between childhood and adulthood and the spaces demarcated as separate are artificial. I believe that meaning making that keeps the child at the center allows us a fresh perspective, one that can bring nuance to our understanding, as well as point towards how some of the challenges of our time can actually benefit from children's ways of looking, from listening to children's voice. But how can we make a place for that? How can we shift our gaze to include the child in it? And how does that impact the child's being and becoming? These are some questions that I hope that we'll be able to reflect on through this talk. The first example that I'd like to share from my recent work is a picture book called Jamlo Walks. I wrote this during the first lockdown when we witnessed the brutality of the Indian state and the extreme difficulties of those living without privilege. Jamlo Maktam was a 12-year-old Adivasi girl from the Muria tribe who had left her home in Bastar, Chhattisgarh to work in the chili fields of Telangana. Despite there being laws against child labor, there is a history of children as young as Jamlo going to work during harvest time in these fields to contribute to the family income. When the lockdown was announced, Jamlo and other migrant laborers suddenly found themselves without any work, without money, without a way of getting back home. So they decided to walk the 200 odd kilometers to their home through forests. On 18th April 2020, Jamlo collapsed about 60 kilometers from her village. Jamlo Walks came as a response to this and to other accounts from the lockdown, from seeing images of migrant labor across the country struggling to get home and being treated in dehumanizing ways. I felt that it was important to talk to children about this because they're not divorced from it. And I also wondered how they would remember this later in the future, at a time past this. And I wondered if there would be a normalizing of this in the future. So I thought it was important to recognize that some people were impacted in far worse ways than others because of the material differences, because of the structural inequalities in society. So even as children grow out of childhood dependencies, all children are vulnerable, but as they grow out of childhood dependencies, the extent to which they continue to be subordinate depends on individual contexts, on structures such as caste and class and gender and race. The story of Jamlo Walks, then tried to present these different experiences. And so the book is about Jamlo's journey as I reimagined it, along with the experiences of 3 other children from contexts that are different from Jamlo's. My instinctive attempt was to record and remember the experiences of the pandemic, the shifting lines of legality and criminality, because with the lockdown, suddenly it became illegal to try to go outside to earn a livelihood, even if you did not have reserves to fall back on. But I do hope that this recording actually enables the process of being and becoming for children. First, I hope that it recognizes the being of Jamlo and others like her by making place for marginalized experiences, so that readers like Jamlo can have stories that work like mirrors. And then by bringing in multiple childhood experiences, I hope that it allows for a becoming, working like a window that opens up to the challenge of social injustice. The scholar Clementine Beauvais has written about children for literature that has a political layer, but seeks to be different from the tradition of didactic literature for children with an overt moral. She uses the term committed literature. As a practitioner who does see her work as political, as work that perhaps falls into this category, I think it's good for me to ask the question, am I moralizing to children, reminiscent of the old moral of the story approach? The way I answer this for myself is that I think it depends on the way that the story is told. not just what it is about. I think it's critical that we think about form and not just content. And for me, an important aspect in thinking about form is the voice of the child's being, or at least the way that I understand it. So this leads me to the question of positionality. What is the place that I write from? As a documentary filmmaker and a writer for children, this has been a constant question because I'm so often very different from the people and the spaces that I'm writing or filming in, either in age or class or caste. I think I sort of, in my career, I've sort of muddled through this question in a kind of instinctive way. But more recently, in the last few years, actually, there's a little more clarity on this. And I think I owe a lot to my introduction to the work of Lata Mani. And I would like to thank Nivedita Subramaniam, actually, who introduced me to Lata Mani's idea of delicate locatedness, in which positionality is not fixed, but dynamic and exploratory. Lata Mani tells us that she talks of how the stories we tell locate us. And I think this points to the interplay between the storyteller and the circumstances and how that can be a shifting relationship. This is something that feels right true to me, actually. And I feel that this allows me to look for what connects me to the people or the space that I'm writing about. I think it is this that influenced the bits in Jamlo, which you can see on the screen, where I imagine her inner world, where she's thinking of the birds, she's thinking of the trees. I think these are places where I'm imagining her being as a child, like many children I have known, or the child that I have been, who respond to nature and the natural world around them. This kind of intersectional approach emphasizes the place of feeling, of emotion. So in writing Jamlo Walks, I was guided by the belief that if we are able to recognize that our emotional experiences are connected with that of another. So for example, our experience of loss, even though it may come out of different contexts, then that may actually perhaps be a way to build an empathetic connection across difference. We may become more than what we are. We may become different from what we are. In tapping into our inner lives, our emotions, in that soft whisper to ourselves, we can acknowledge not only that there are multiple childhoods, but that there are overlapping universalities that draw from the fact of our being human. That, I think, is the fertile ground that can aid the process of being and becoming. To create literature or art, I think that reflects this sort of layered space requires that we interrogate ourselves constantly during the creative process, questioning decisions both about content and form. Without this, stories of committed literature run the danger of simply being token checkboxes of diversity. And in fact, they can end up replicating that old moral of the story approach. That kind of story is about flattened messages rather than layered meanings that child readers can respond to as individuals, that they can create meaning on their own with, and that can resonate with them as well as offer possibilities of imagining the world that they hope to live in. It was this process of questioning that turned the narrative in Nida Finds a Way. Nida Finds a Way is a chapter book for early readers, and it started out as a way for me to write about Muslim children in which their Muslimness was not of consequence to the plot. This was in response to a lack of nuanced representation of Muslim children in Indian children's literature. So it was about the being of Muslim children in India. I set the story in Okhla, an area I'm familiar with because I live here. It's an area that's predominantly inhabited by Muslims. It's often called a Muslim area, sometimes a ghetto. The story that I began with was lighthearted, funny, about a parent-child relationship in which the child is feisty and adventurous and wants to learn to ride a bicycle. But the father is timid and too scared to let her out on the crowded streets. So it is the child who has to find a way of getting around her father's fears, showing him that it is possible to be brave and step out into a wider world, to become. But then protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act began across the country, and Nida's neighborhood, where I'd set the story, actually became one of the key sites of the protest. And so the story took a turn. I will read a small excerpt from the book, from a chapter called New Words. Over the next few days, this became a regular thing in Nida's world. Hushed conversations inside the house and loud sloganeering on the streets, like you can see in the photograph on the right. Simi Baji was busy making posters and was hardly at home. But Fahim Khalu and Sitwat Khala did not stop her, unlike Abba the warrior, who was now permanently in place. Abba's arms flapped when Dadi made the humph sound and said things like, India is our home, not just this house, or Hum kagaz nahi dikhayenge. We will not show our papers. That was one of the common slogans during the protest. Be careful what you say, Abba said. Words can be trouble. Nida was puzzled. How could words be trouble? This excerpt contains things that I saw and heard during the protests. Nida is an amalgamation of so many children that I've encountered. And when the space they inhabit became precarious and liminal in terms of legality, then as a writer, I really felt the need to write that into the story. There were children at the protest site, and in fact, this became a point of contention. The child was seen as something that was being molded into becoming something else, either anti-national or responsible citizen, depending on which side was looking at them. Our world today has become one that increasingly seeks flattened meanings and leaves less and less room for words to remain a play between individual writer and individual reader. In today's India, the child's world is not sanitized and safe from a context in which words can actually be trouble. Words that hurt sentiments, words used many years ago, words shared from someone else's work. All of these have been at different points turned into criminal acts. So if we want literature or art created for children to work in a way that allows them to make meaning, to reflect on the world, then it also needs to emerge from a self-reflexive process. I need to think about what is it I want to say and how do I want to say it. This means that the possibilities of being and becoming are not just for children, but in fact for adults. Adults who create the work, but also adults who engage with it. Because the development of the self and of identity is a dynamic and lifelong process. As Catherine Rundle says in her wise book, children's books are not a hiding place, they are a seeking place. I would extend that to say that it is not just the finished product that is a seeking place, a path to becoming, but also the process. As someone who seeks to make place for the child, it's important then for me to ask the question, how do we listen? Sometimes in my practice, it has meant observation, just being in a space and observing the child. And I'd like to share a small excerpt from a film that I did a few years ago called Happiness Class. It's a small excerpt and I shall just play that.
My name is Rehan Khan. My father name is Shahbaz Khan. My mother name is Fatima Begum. My brother name is Shahan Khan. तेरी मदर का नाम क्या है? फिर से बोलियो. तेरी मदर का नाम क्या है? फातिमा बेगम. ये कैसा नाम है? अरे मुसलमानों में आता है ना. पहली बार ऐसा नाम सुना हूं मैं.
So in this excerpt, we happened to be in this space and we were lucky that the child started speaking to us, to the camera. The conversation between the two boys is actually a very rich window into contemporary Indian society. The first child shares the names of all his family members. He's Muslim, the names are all recognizably Muslim. His deskmate, who shares space with him, eats with him, even if they don't share food, they are eating together. Perhaps they share stationery. So this deskmate asks him to repeat the name and then declares he's never heard such a name before. It is a moment, I think, with many layered meanings. This child has never encountered a name like that despite centuries of coexistence between Hindus and Muslims in India. And clearly, this has never come up in the classroom in any way. The children's voices here are pointing to how we can understand and respond to difference, indifference, segregation, and inclusion. So sometimes the listening is quietly paying attention and including the child. At other times, listening to the child's voice can mean an active seeking out of it. This can be seen in one of my recent project called Hindustani, which began as a research project on children and citizenship, and it is now a multimedia art project that includes a website with children's artwork and poetry, essays, and a podcast. Hindustani was an attempt to create a space where children can speak for themselves, where we can speak together. The burden of futurity rests on children, but most often there are adults who are speaking on their behalf. And their voices and sometimes even their silences are marginalized. So Hindustani is an attempt to somehow create a space where we can speak together. It was conceived as a research project that would both examine and enable children's engagement with the arts around the idea of citizenship. I chose to conduct short art workshops with children at 3 sites using poetry writing, drawing, and collage. The sites chosen bring attention to children from marginalized spaces. The first is Shaheen Bagh in Delhi, which was one of the sites against this, one of the key sites of the protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was Nida's neighborhood. The second is rural Firozpur in Punjab, which had been active in the farmers' protests against some changes in laws that the government had introduced. And then the third is a library in urban resettlement colony in Bombay, which caters largely to Dalit and Muslim children, so from poor working class families. The project sought to understand how children at these sites make sense of the key ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which are enshrined in the Constitution of India, through a collaborative creative process, followed by interviews with a select few. It is my hope that the collective articulation by children through the artworks and the interviews point towards new ways of addressing the challenges of citizenship, as well as contribute towards our understanding of childhood and of the place of the arts in education and in life. One of the key ideas that Hindustani threw up is the reiteration of how the arts contain the possibility of being and becoming simultaneously. This can be seen in one example that is on the screen. This is an exercise on the prompt of liberty. Basically, I asked the children to first choose a color for the background, a color that symbolized freedom for them, and then to think of a symbol that symbolized freedom, to draw that or to cut it out and make a kind of collage. And then finally to write a line about why they had chosen that particular symbol. So the artwork on the left was done by a girl from grade 8 in Shaheen Bagh. And she said she chose the colors for the background because she felt that that was the freedom for her to choose those colors. And then she chose a bunch of balloons because they symbolize freedom to her through their ability to float in the air freely. And finally, she wrote, "I want freedom to burst like a balloon when friends say racist things." When I spoke to her about it, she spoke about how she had been bullied for being a Muslim child, particularly during the anti-CAA protests, and she'd often been called a Pakistani or a terrorist. and she had found that there was little that she could do about it. She had not even been able to speak to a teacher. The second artwork was done by somebody in grade 7 at the same site. She chose the colors of the Indian flag as a background because that represented freedom to her. And then she chose three things. She chose a bird, a balloon, and those little squiggles that you see symbolize the air, because all three of them, she said, have the ability to be free in the world. And then the lines that she's written speak of the desire to sort of step outside, to roam around. I want to learn, to be free, to learn new things. I want freedom from people who stop me from playing. So to me, these two examples are, in a sense, a kind of window into this idea of being and becoming. The first is a sense of the expression of the child, which conveys her feelings at being bullied, her sense of repression. And the second, in some ways, represents an aspirational idea of liberty, what freedom can mean for a girl child who's living in a circumscribed everyday with a lot of sort of her comings and goings are, looked at, and, there are stops on that. And so in that sense, I feel that this example, this particular exercise on liberty, allows us this understanding of the possibility that lies in art. The humanist psychologist Carl Rogers has written about the experiencing of the potential self, and he has theorized about how the process of therapy allows for an awareness of what one has experienced, and later it may be recognized that what was being experienced may all become a part of self. To me, this example from Hindustani is a little bit like that it allows for the felt experience, what one experiences viscerally, and shows us how that may actually be connected to the development of the full individual. The podcast that developed from this project was a way to share children's voices with others so that others can listen, both children and adults. And the hope is that by listening to listening to these voices, we can work towards another kind of becoming. I'd like to play a very small excerpt in which you can listen to some of the poetry by children in children's voices.
Because. Because I was very happy to see the Taj Mahal. Because I was very happy when we went to hoist a tricolor with my family. Because I like to celebrate Eid and Diwali. Because I like to wear kurta and pajama. Because I like to eat dal roti. That is why I'm Indian.
Because we celebrate Eid. Because India's flag flies in our school. Because I speak Hindi. Because we offer namaz. Because I go to my grandmother's house for the holidays. That is why I am Indian.
Because Hindi is taught in every school of India. Because whenever I open my cupboard, I always find salwar kameez. Because all the people of our compound gather together to celebrate Independence Day or Republic Day and hoist the flag. Because at home, my mother cooks roti daily with every dish. Because at every wedding, our houses get decorated with marigold flowers. That is why I am Indian.
So each episode of the podcast has poetry written by the children with a kind of commentary that tries to understand the ideas thrown up by that. So I would request all of you to please go and listen. It's available wherever podcasts are available: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and also on YouTube, and of course on our website. Sorry about that. So one of the important ideas that this project has led me towards is that of listening to children contextually in a reflexive and dialogic way, and to move away from an emphasis on the authentic voice of the child. This is no different. Listening to children, I think, is no different than listening to adults and to the way that research unfolds with adult participants. Engaging with children as with adults is a process in which the researcher creates a space, a framework for interaction, and also for a path for thinking through the way that the questions are formed, the order in which they are asked, the manner in which the discussion unfolds. Spiro has written about research with children and made a case for the researchers' self-reflexivity so that we may acknowledge the messiness, ambiguity, polyvocality, non-factuality, and multi-layered nature of meaning in stories that research produces. This does not take away from the meaningfulness of what children articulate. It's simply that the meaning must be assessed in the context of how the child expressed herself. We can never really be completely certain of what is authentic, even when it comes to adults. And yet, there is meaning in every interaction. And I think that assessing that meaning within the framework of the context is more relevant. In Hindustani, my individual subjectivity was the larger frame within which the conversations took place and which influenced the kind of exercises that were designed, the kind of prompts that I gave them. So it's important to remember that, and it's important to remember this so that we can avoid romanticizing the notion of the pure voice of the child. The process used in Hindustani reveals an intersection between the adult voice and the child's voice. This may not contain certitude, but it does contain the possibility of multiple meanings, and that can help us re-examine ideas like community, like public space, rights, through the inclusion of children in a larger, wider public discourse. I'll end with a short text that I've written that is being turned into a picture book right now. I share this as an example of this intersection between the adult voice and the child's voice, and how listening to children can enrich adult understandings, and how engaging with the arts can enable the process of being and becoming for both children and adults alike. This text emerged from my interaction with children, the same group of Afghan children that I started out with as part of that art workshop. So we would watch a film, and then we would talk about the ideas that the film threw up, and then we would do an art exercise. This particular session we watched a film called The Present by a Palestinian British filmmaker. And then we talked about the idea of borders, and then the children created the artwork that is on the screen that you can see. And it is listening to what they had to say in words and also through the artwork that led me to write this text. So I'd like to just read that out to end this session. This is a line. It can stretch endlessly, straight or curving. It can be on the ground or in the air, maybe even in space. It can even be invisible. Like when we crossed over from Afghanistan and came to India. Like when they announced on the news that Indian planes will not fly over Pakistani airspace. Like when I want to go up to the teacher in a class, but I'm scared to. Like when the class monitor does not let me get past to go drink water. Like when my brother refused to go to school because there was a fight and the other boys told him to go back to Afghanistan. Sometimes a line takes on other shapes, like the time when the park gate was locked during Corona, or the time when I got late going to school and the guard would not let me in, or the time when my family and I went to the refugee officer, but his office door never opened for us. We had to go back again and again. Baba Jan says the line between me and the outside at night is to keep me safe. Bibi Jan says she wants to reach over the line and hug me when we do a video call with her in Kabul. I hate those lines. Sometimes it feels like I carry the line inside me. It clings, crushes, controls me. But sometimes it feels like I can jump over, climb over, fly over all the lines and just be me. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Samina, for this incredible talk, for sharing your diverse experiences as a creator, as a researcher, as an artist as well. And congratulations on publishing the books and on the new one coming up as well. And we have time for questions, for comments from the audience. You can ask questions in the chat. You can raise your hand well and say your questions directly. Ask your questions directly. I can't see any at the moment, but I hope they will, and I'm sure they will come in a second. Oh yes, there is question from Nivedita. Yes, please.
Hi, Samina. It's so lovely to see you, and it was wonderful listening to you. And I just wanted to ask, you'd mentioned quite early on, and if I'm getting this wrong, I apologize. But I was just really interested in knowing or hearing a little more from you about what you said about voice and form and thinking about form. Could you speak a little bit more about this, please?
Yeah. So, this question, as children's writers often get asked, no, who are you writing for? Target audience, the question of target audience, And I think many writers will say this. I've heard others as well. And I think that when I'm writing, it's very hard for me to think about like a target audience, right? But I think that I do write for so in that sense, I'm only writing for myself. But I think I do write for that self which was also a child, or I think I do write for the children that I know. So in that sense, I'm trying to remain in touch with the voice of the child, to be able to think about what is it that would be of interest to me and to that child that I know. So, and that's a kind of amalgam of, so many, like the child that I was, the children that I know, all of that. So I think that in that sense, that place that I write from, this plays an important part in thinking about it. I'm not sure that one is always successful, because that adult me and what I want to say perhaps also, like, it finds its way in. But that attempt is to be able to remain in touch with that voice of the child. Does that make sense, Nivedita?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. Samina, would you call yourself an activist as well?
No, I don't really see myself as an activist. I actually, when I discovered Clementine Beauvais' work, it really spoke to me, because I think that that's where I sort of fit in. I see my work as political, but I don't know if I'm an activist, because I think that requires something else. Activism requires something else, and I'm not doing that. I'm not out there in the way that activists are. I'm not making myself vulnerable in that way. And I don't mean that artists don't make themselves vulnerable. I think the all creative work, putting it out there, there's an act of vulnerability there, but it's different. So so I see myself as being political, but not activist.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Because I think we also have this question sometimes as researchers, and there is a term small activism, and sometimes I feel that yes, some things that we are doing may be coming out of our comfort zones and indeed becoming vulnerable because we are pursuing some agenda or we are supporting some cause. I mean, this way we become maybe activists a little bit.
Yeah,
but of course, I guess
I think to activism, but I don't think. Yeah, I don't see.
Yeah. Do we have any other comments, questions? If I may have a question as well, could you maybe share any insights into how parents react to your work, or other adults, maybe teachers at schools?
So it's mixed. It's mixed. I must say that there are many parents who respond positively, who want to share this kind of work also with their children. But there have also, and I know of, like, when Jamlo, when I wrote Jamlo and that was sort of being made, I don't think that I was very clear until the book got out into the world. There was still some little doubt about, like how it would work. I wasn't like, I don't know, I don't think I was fully convinced, or maybe I didn't know. But now that it's been out in the world, and I know of people who have used it, I've had responses from parents and also from library educators and schools and from children. It's been used with sort of middle class children. So that idea of window and mirror, it's been used with different groups of children. So people have used it with children in from sort of similar backgrounds to Jamlos, and have shared that, the responses from them, as well as I know, like in middle class schools, it's been used. So I can see now that when Clementine Beauvais talks of committed literature being a kind of literature that puts forward politics, but is open-ended and can allow for readers to find their own meaning, I can see how that works. So of course I've had those positive responses and it's been great. But there are also responses where parents don't want this. I know of somebody who runs a book club in another city, and she wanted to read Nida Finds a Way with the children in her book club. And one of the parents messaged her saying that, why are you putting this kind of propaganda out there? I don't see that book as propaganda, but yeah, so that's it. So if we are going to write this kind of like, and we want this open-endedness, then we have to also be open to the fact that someone will see it as propaganda. So she didn't, she couldn't, though she said to me that, it's a long road, and I work with the kids because that's where I think the change is going to come. And I mean, that resonates with me as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any voices from the audience? Well, I still have more questions to ask because I find all your work fascinating. And I'm curious, also thinking of my own experience of research with children. To what extent your work, let's say workshops that you've done, or maybe the podcasts as well, to what extent this work is open to children's, let's say, ideas of how this work of what this work could look like? So, in the sense, are they shaping your practice?
The children?
Yes. Do they, do you talk about with them about, what about what you want to do and how this should be done and what they would like to do as well?
So definitely we talk about like what we want to do during the workshop space, like what I'm thinking of for the workshop, and then what they are thinking, and then sometimes it changes, so there were some of photographs which it is an ongoing workshop. I had these little doll photographs in this presentation. So that this was like the second year that I went back to the same group of kids, and I said to them that I don't want to do that, bringing in a film and talking about that. I want to do something else, and I'm thinking of this. I wanted to bring in somebody who works with waste materials, all kinds of materials, to do this really wonderful doll making workshop. And so I said to them, are you open to doing that? So they were, and we did 3 sessions with her, and they really enjoyed it because it was all about like playing with materials. But they, at the end of it, they wanted also to create dolls, which, like a lot of the dolls that came out of those sessions were, like the lost thing. They were like, wild, and they were like creatures, and they were not anthropomorphic in that sense. And the children, I think, wanted to create dolls which were more like that. So we then have worked with them again, because then they had sort of developed the skills, and then they made these versions which were of their own choosing. Though you can see very, like, what they learned from her, how that has also played a part in it. but there was a certain kind of, like a recognizably human form, like the eyes and the hair that they wanted to do in this kind of way. So that changes something in the workshop space. How it impacts my own work and what I'm thinking, that often may not happen till later, but I think that that engagement has definitely, and I think the last text that I wrote, that I shared lines, is actually an example of that just by witnessing and listening and being there, something sort of something starts to form inside me. And actually that text was written almost like in one go, but I think that happens because it's been sitting inside, and it was written like many months after that particular session was done. So in that sense, I think working with them definitely shapes my practice. But in that immediate, it is more about, both of us, sort of like me and the children, working together to figure out like the thing that we want to do together, in which, of course, what I'm saying is also, and sometimes there are constraints that come from other things, like time and, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Oh, do we have any comments, questions? Yes. Anybody there? Yes, please. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have one more question, which I was thinking about through the different things that you shared, whether it's Hum Hindustani or the workshops. Do, do you find yourself sometimes, like, when children are are writing, that they have you ever found yourself in a situation where they write something but are not sure they want to share it, or write something but find that it's taken a different form and that they need to think about it? And how do you work with situations like that? Because you were also working with different media, I found it like, yeah, it's that's what makes it so different, because it's not just language. You're looking at artwork, you work with film, and so that gives you so much more room and possibility to also understand children's own engagement so very in a much more rounded or fuller sense. So I just wondered, yeah, about that.
So, in the workshop situations, I haven't really encountered that, they've written something and then they're unsure of it. But it's really like important, like we do a sharing, even within the workshop. So at that stage, if there is, I always make it a point to say that we are going to do this. And it is that because we learn also from listening to each other, so we have to feel comfortable in sharing whatever it is that we're doing, so that keeping that option open for them if they don't want to. So in the work, also because I think the workshop situation, like it, there isn't, the engagement is not so long term. With the Afghan children, of course, I've been going back, but I've been very careful in this particular context, Nivedita, that I don't, like I'm not probing too much. I'm not asking them, like even when we have spoken about borders, like in this particular exercise, I speak about like everyday situations, but I don't probe beyond a point, because I feel they have come through something so difficult, and I'm not really skilled or in a position to be able to handle something that which may be really like touching on the inner experience in some way. So we've kept it fairly light, yeah, in this particular case. But I have had this experience with, when I was teaching film. So I had 1 year, I had a so there is a, when children come into sort of film programs and programs like that, they feel that it's an easy thing, and that it will be easier than doing biology or something, and then they find that it's actually asking them to do a lot. It's asking them for something perhaps more than it would have been in biology. So 1 year, so there's a lot of this, like, also because you are wanting them to create, and this was in a formal space, so you're wanting them to create work that can also get them good grades. I used to tell them very often to start with what they know, because you need to have time otherwise to research something that they don't know. And so I would say start with something that you know, with yourself, your immediate neighborhood, people that you know, that kind of thing. And this 1 year I had a boy, and he made a film about himself and his sexuality. And it was a lovely, lovely little film. And then there was a moment. So in the class we were a small group, and he was totally comfortable with sharing it. But then there was a moment in the school where they were asking children to share work in the assembly, and he came to me first and he said that I would like to show my work. So I was really quite I was surprised, but I was also proud that he felt able to do it. So there was some time for this, and I, wondered whether he was okay with it. And I spoke to the school director, and when we were talking, she said to me, "Ask him again, because this is a big thing, in the school, to show this to the other students, because it's not like the context is free of bullying." So, and there was time. So I chatted with him again, and I said, "Are you really sure about this? And why don't you take some time and think about it?" And in that conversation, we had a slightly more detailed one in which I asked, how many people knew, had he been able to tell his family, these sorts of things. And he told me that he hadn't yet been able to tell his family. So I told him, "Why don't you think about this?" Because I said, as a parent, if I came to know this because it was first publicly announced, I would feel very, very hurt. And I said that, like, there's no need for you to rush into this. You may decide that you want to do it, like, after 5 years, you may decide you want to do it together, but you don't have to feel this pressure of showing the work and then that becoming the reason why you have to tell your parents. And, you have to take your time over that. So and then after he said, "Okay, I'll think about it." And after 3 days, he messaged me. He didn't come also. He messaged me and said, "Ma'am, I think I won't do it." So that was one occasion that this did happen.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you. It just shows how ethically difficult this work is, and this is also part of the vulnerability that you mentioned. I think there's so much that we, whenever we are working with children as researchers, as creators, that we need to be how much attention we need to pay all the time to
same process of, like, interrogation, that you have to ask yourself, like, that self-reflexivity that is asked of us as artists. I think it is also required of us as teachers and facilitators.
And we have time for maybe one more question from Anjali, please. Or comment. Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. A great talk, Samina. I was just wondering, when you conduct these workshops with these little children, or even if they're like a bit older, I'd like to focus on, let's say, with the younger section. This, when something, not presumably, but something really difficult, or a theme, let's say a child that's dealing with some issue back home, and it's not the most it's not very simple or subtle, and then while you are working with them in the workshops, let's say through art, they depict something that's going on, like domestic violence or something of that sort, something along the lines of, if you ask them, like, what's a normal day at home like, and he may just casually drop, he or she, or they may just casually drop it. Yeah, as usual, mama was getting beaten for like not putting enough salt. Like, those things have happened, right? So
No, it happened.
no, with children. So when you come across like these really difficult topics while working with children, how do you deal with them? Like how do you deal? Do you confront the children about it, or do you go, or do you just like tiptoe around it? Like I'm really interested in knowing, like, they, because we know they're young, they
No,
cannot.
yeah, I get your question. No, what I meant is no, it hasn't happened to me, and that's because see, I don't do art therapy. No,
Right.
that's a whole other thing, right? I work with kids in being able to actually just play with practice. Yeah, we are playing with words, and we are playing with color, and we are playing with form. We're playing with the way that we see. Yeah, in the course of that some things come in, for example, like say this borders situation,
Mhm.
but I am not probing into their lives in a way that I say to them, yeah, draw from your everyday life. Yeah, like say in Hindustani, the idea was to be able to see how children understand liberty, equality, and fraternity, how they experience these things. And so it was to draw from their everyday life. So of course things will come from their everyday life which are about where they have experienced inequality, and you can see some of that work is up on the website, and I've also written about it. But I'm not drawing into their personal life in that kind of way, no, because I'm not like a therapist, I'm not trained at all, I don't have those skills, so I don't want to get into that territory, because I'm not skilled at that. Plus that my engagement is more with the idea of play, of creative play. So perhaps because of that, I've not actually had that. So like I said, with the Afghan children, some of them have very traumatic stories, but we have not, that has not come into that space in this kind of way. So I think that that's a distinction that I make. I'm not trained to handle that. Yeah. With, for example, with Jamlo, that is something when I've read the story, because often I have read it at festivals, and that we don't get so much time with children, so it is something that I thought about. So when I read it at a festival, for example, I said to the kids when I walked in, I said, I'm going to read you a story that is not a very happy story, and it's a sad story. So is that okay? Should I read it? Should I share that with you? And so there were many children, they raised their hands and said yes. So I said, but why? Why do you want me to read you a sad story? And there were some children who said, oh, but because there is sadness also in our life or in other people's life. And so it's okay that we should have a story about that. So I went ahead and I read that. But I did, because it's a very short time and I don't get to see them after that, I did speak to the parents and whoever the adults were around. And I said that there may be questions that children have which may come tomorrow, which may come tonight, when I'm not there. And so you have to be there to be able to kind of answer those questions, to kind of like hold space in that sense for them, because I will not be there. When it has been used by library educators, that's one of the things that they have shared with me that they have done, that they don't, it's not just a one time thing, so they'll space it over a few sessions so that there's a possibility of conversation over some days. So I think that those are the kinds of choices that I would make. But I think what you are talking about is more in the realm of art therapy. And I have not actually encountered that, that a child has suddenly depicted. Bullying comes up. Yeah. So it is also of like the personal experience, but personal experience in a kind of slightly more public space. Those sorts of things have come up. Of course, things like, children have said experience of inequality when my friend gets less halwa than her brother. Those sorts of things have come up. Yeah. But nothing that is as traumatic as what you are talking about.
Right. Okay.
And I think that is because of the kind of work that I'm doing.
Right. So your curation, the way you curate the content such that these topics rarely come up.
I don't think I'm curating content.
Mhm.
I think that it's the approach that I have.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
it's not that these topics don't come up. It
Mhm.
is that they haven't come up so far. And that I think that because the focus has been on the creative practice and creative play, rather than on a kind of like this sharing, therapeutic sharing.
Right. Thank you. That was really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjali, for the question. Thank you for the answer. And we need to be finishing. So let me thank you once again, Samina, for providing us so much insights into your work. Thank you very much. I'm sure everyone appreciates this as much as I do. And thank you very much, everyone who has joined us. You're most welcome to reach out to me if you are interested in Samina's work and you haven't had a chance to download the links, or you may, of course, reach out to Samina directly. That's the best thing to do. But do not hesitate. And also, if you are interested in Erasmus Mundus International Master, Children's Literature, Media, Culture, and the new one, Children's Literature, Media, and Cultural Entrepreneurship, please get in touch. Thank you very much once again for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justina. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to everybody who joined. Some of you, I'm sure, from sort of at a late hour from this part of the world. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.